Alright guys, today we're going to talk about the presidency of Lyndon B. Johnson. So, a little background. Johnson, he's a senator from Texas. He was chosen to be Kennedy's running mate. He is sworn into office when Kennedy is assassinated in November 1963. He is sworn in on Air Force One a couple hours right after Kennedy gets shot. So, Johnson, when he's president, he's popular for a couple of things. He's known for the Johnson treatment. He would get into the faces of the people he's talking to and kind of bully them into giving him what he wants. Also, he would sit there and have them meet with him in some of the most random, weird places to throw him off the game. One event that comes to mind is when he's promoting the Great Society, he actually has some people come and meet with him in the pool at the White House while he's promoting his new idea to these people. So, election 1964 comes up. He runs. He wins. He wins a landslide against Barry Goldwater for the Republicans. And he wins because of his Great Society plan and everything he's doing. He's getting some sympathy from Kennedy dying a year earlier. And also, he is continuing what Kennedy started, and people are really liking that. His civil rights movement, his war on poverty, his reforms to improve society in general. People are very pro-Johnson during this time period. So, his Great Society plan, he wants to focus on domestic programs to help civil rights, help the plight of African Americans in the U.S., help poverty. He wants to give opportunities to people who are suffering in America, give them a better life, help them make more money, get them better educated. That goes along with education. So, some programs that come out of this and that are still around today, you still have Medicare, which is insurance that helps the elderly Americans, Medicaid, which is for people, individuals who cannot afford health care, who cannot afford doctor appointments and hospital bills. This exists to help them out. And then food stamps provide food assistance for low-income individuals and families. People get these food stamps, helps them pay for their bills at the grocery store. All three of these programs are still around today, and these are ones that he created in the 1960s, and just shows that America benefited from these. So Johnson's big thing is he wants to do a war on poverty. He wants to better American society for people living in America so they can have better education, job training, community development. He wants to make America great again, to improve American society for the people. So he introduced these programs, the Office of Economic Opportunity. He oversaw community-based anti-poverty programs. He wants to help build up cities, desegregate neighborhoods, build up the impoverished neighborhoods and cities to help the housing issues. You have the Neighborhood Youth Corps. This gives job experience to poor urban teens, helps them encourage high school graduation. He wants to make sure a bunch of kids are graduating school and going to college and provide the money and the opportunity for these kids to go to college if they so want to. Job Corps gives youth job skills so they can be better trained and hold better jobs. And then you have VISTA, which is his version of the Peace Corps. It's a domestic version. They go around to impoverished neighborhoods, to run-down areas in America, and they help build it up. They provide support in the school system and in other aspects of American society. So, that was his domestic policies. Now, the big thing we're going to focus on is LBJ and his civil rights. So, civil rights movement is in full swing during this time period. He passes the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which there was something that Kennedy was working on, and he makes sure to honor Kennedy's memory that he gets this passed. This guarantees equal access to public accommodations. It desegregates this issue. It creates the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, so you cannot discriminate on jobs by gender or race. Everybody gets equal opportunity for job advancements and jobs. He also passes the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Federal government registers voters, and it gets rid of the literacy tax for voting. This makes it so that African Americans, particularly who could not read, they're still able to vote. Remember, I talked about this late 1800s, early 1900s. Things were being passed to make it so African Americans could not vote, specifically in the South. And then you have later on the Civil Rights Act of 1968. It banned discrimination, sale, rental, or financing of housing. So it provides equal housing opportunity for whites and blacks. The issue was that blacks were having to live in the rundown areas of cities, and there was very little housing, so they were at a disadvantage. So this Civil Rights Act made it so that was illegal, and you had to provide equal housing for both races. So there are some examples of civil rights movements that were happening in the 1960s. Some of the most famous ones were sit-ins, and particularly there's one that happened in Greensboro at a Woolworth 5 and Dime store. These African American college students, they go up to the counter, they sit at the counter. The counter was whites only, and they refuse to move until they get service. The people running the restaurant, they refuse to give them service, so you have a standoff between the two groups. And it builds and builds. So it starts with these four, but more and more African American kids from the universities around the area, they come in and they just start taking shifts sitting at his counter, refusing to move until they get service. Now, these types of sit-ins, they would also inspire wait-ins, kneel-ins, bowl-ins. People were sitting in white areas and refusing to move from those areas. You also have Freedom Riders. They're challenging segregation on interstate buses in the South. Remember Rosa Parks and all that stuff with refusing to give up your seat to whites, which was the requirement. Even if you were sitting in the black section, if it was more whites than blacks, the blacks were supposed to move to further back of the bus and give up part of their section to whites. So these are being fueled by African Americans in the 1960s, fighting for equal rights for them. So, one famous person from this, and very important to know, is James Meredith. He's a 28-year-old black Air Force veteran. He registers to go to school at University of Mississippi. University of Mississippi is not allowing him to go there. Federal marshals are attacked by a mob when Meredith tries to enroll, and he's trying to go there. And Kennedy orders the National Guard to go there to enforce order and force these universities, force these states to allow desegregation. This isn't a state option. The federal government is saying you have to do this, and they're having to do this. Martin Luther King Jr., he's at Birmingham. He gets arrested for protesting these injustices that are going on in Alabama. And he issues these letters from Birmingham jail. He's saying, we're going to resist this issue. We're going to fight for civil rights, but we're going to do it with civil disobedience. We're not going to use violence. We're just going to disobey laws that we deemed unjust. So the two big ones, the two big civil rights leaders during this time period are Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Now, Martin Luther King, like I said, civil disobedience, believed that Americans and Africans, that black could be both. You didn't have to be one or the other. And he wants desegregation. He believed whites and blacks could integrate together and live together. Love thy neighbor. Malcolm X, he believed separation. He believed blacks should separate from themselves from white society, that white society was influencing blacks wrongly, and that blacks needed to separate from them and have their own little black community. He appeals to frustrated African Americans who aren't thinking the civil rights movement is doing enough for them, and so you have these two different visions of how civil rights should be in the 1960s. Now, both of these guys, unfortunately, will be assassinated in the 1960s because of their views on civil rights and how they're trying to promote equality for African Americans during this time period. Now, real quick, two different important organizations that dealt with civil rights. You have the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee. These are groups of college kids that are promoting desegregation through nonviolence organizations. And then you have Black Panthers. They believed in arming blacks against white police using violence to get what they want. Now, two different types of discrimination. These are two different types to remember. They're very important. De jure discrimination, discrimination by laws. This is mainly in the South. And de facto discrimination by custom and tradition. This is mainly in the North. De jure, you're going to see laws that are imposing that require segregation, that don't allow blacks to be where whites are, separate but equal. The diner, the buses, the schools, water fountains, bathrooms, all this. You have whites, you have blacks. They're supposed to be equal, but they're not really. De facto discrimination by custom and tradition. In the North, you don't have as much segregation, but because of the lives that the whites are living and the lives that the blacks are living, they're being forced to live in different areas, like the slums in New York City, Chicago. So they're not being forced to be segregated, but because of the opportunities that both of them are having, they are being segregated. So that's two different. One is forced by law, the other is forced by the traditions, customs that people are used to. They're forcing it without even realizing they're really forcing the segregation. So that's it for Johnson and his civil rights and his Great Society program. We'll talk about later the Vietnam War and Johnson with that.